Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kellyanne Wilford, and we will be discussing the silent way because that is what most of our viewers would have chosen for this week's panel discussion. The silent way is a language teaching approach developed by Mr. Caleb Gattanego in the 60s. This basically focus on learner discovery, encouraging students to take responsibility for their own learning, right? So it is basically a student-centered approach. The teacher basically is there as the facilitator, right? It is called silent because so the teacher speaks very little. It allows the students to explore, to correct themselves, and use target language actively. So I am going to hand you over to another expert, Miss Karina C. Prasad. She's going to give you some more information on that. Miss Prasad?
Good afternoon, everyone. Now, the core of this approach, the silent way, that I understand is a brief that students learn best when they discover knowledge. Now, instead of simply receiving it. Now, it's about creating a safe space for students to think, explore, and discover their in the silent way. In this method, the teacher acts more as a guide, using visual clues, gestures, and prompts, while the students or the learners take the lead in building their own understanding. Right? Now, instead of the teacher explaining every grammar rules or anything that is being taught, students learn by figuring things out themselves through problem solving and discovery. For example, rather than saying, this is how you make a sentence. Now, as a teacher, we might use colored coded word charts. Each colored represent a different part of speech. Maybe nouns are blue, verbs are red, adjectives are green. And learners will use colors to create their own sentences. Now, the teacher doesn't correct them verbally. Instead, they might point to a color. The teacher might raise an eyebrow or nod, guiding the students to self-correct them. Now, the students will look at the teacher, and sometimes she would nod, sometimes she would smile, and they would now to look back into their own work and say, teacher is showing me something. Let me check back my work. Right? Now it's because students end up not just memorizing but understanding how language works. Learning should be an active process, not something that's handed to you. And this approach really puts into as a practice.
Good, good. You couldn't have said it much better, Miss Karina. And to move down the line to Mr. Payne. I see it seems like you're buzzing with information to share. So go right ahead, Mr. Payne.
Okay, I want to talk a bit about challenges teachers may face. Teachers may find it difficult to limit their talking inside the classroom, especially with young learners. The teachers often they speak, they give the information, they explain everything to the children. But they may find it challenging to use the silent way approach because that mostly involves in allowing the learners to take charge, allowing the learners to get their own information, solve the problems. Another challenge is that the students' unfamiliarity and self direct learning may initially feel uncertain and frustrated. So the teachers may find it hard seeing that the children will trying on their own to do certain stuff and they would get frustrated They would be uncertain. They were asking if they're going in the right direction. They were asking if they're doing this the right way. That brings me to my third challenge. Traditional teachers may find it difficult to explain, not explain everything. They often explain information, the rules, and correct mistakes of learners. In a classroom, most teachers, traditional teachers, they they mostly lecture, they give information, and they might find it hard for the children now to come up with their own information in the classroom with less of the teacher lecturing. But that means that the teacher shouldn't give no guidance. Yes, the teacher will give a little guidance to the children, but not much talking, not much giving, too much instruction, allowing the children to come up with their own ideas, solve and fix errors themselves. Yes, thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you so much, sir. I feel like you be in many of these classrooms and you know what's going on, because I really get some silent children, right? I really have some silent ones. And then when I realize that, hey, when I take a step back and I stop the talking, because I feel like I talk a lot, right? When I take a step back and I stop the talking, it gives them opportunity to answer questions and speak. So Miss Paul, I know as a classroom teacher, you have some examples that you want to share with us. So go right ahead.
Good evening, everyone. I will not go back to what my fellow panelists would have mentioned. So this method, it treats language as an active process, now which it includes problem-solving activities. As a teacher who is guilty of using the traditional way in teaching, now I believe that the silent way approach is an excellent way in allowing the learners to take charge or take full control, because method, it is based solely on pupils. It is pupil centered. So whereas the teacher will be active in the classroom or sitting in the classroom, however, teacher will not be correcting the child whenever he or she is wrong. Which would take me to my first example that I have, oral sentence expansion. So most of the times, I would usually create my little sentence strip from the week prior or the day prior, and I would take these materials into the classroom. And what I would usually do is sometimes when I go into the class, I would just pin the sentence strip on the board using top nails, and I would sit there. Sometimes I would say, okay, so today we're looking at oral sentence expansion, but because the children are familiar with this example, I will just go and pin the sentence strip on the board and leave it there. Now, based on their sitting arrangement, I have two pupils sitting together. So I would ask them to out a piece of paper and expand the sentence for me. Or sometimes I don't even say to expand the sentence, because this is something that we've been doing for about 8 weeks. So they have fair knowledge on what is needed and what should be done on a daily basis. So I would give them the sentence strip, or they will just go ahead, start constructing the sentences. And now this approach also, I feel it is a very excellent approach, because it helps to boost the children's confidence, because within the classroom, we face different challenges. And one challenge I have a child in my class. I have a few, sorry. They're very quiet. Unless when I'm discussing a topic or I'm taking them outside to observe something that is related to the topic we're about to do, I would call upon them just to hear their little voices, and they would respond. Other than that, I don't hear from these children. This approach will boost their confidence, because when they're in pairs, sometimes these same children that we tend to overlook and say, oh, this child is so quiet, he or she does not talk, you will find them interacting with their peers. And sometimes if I'm to walk around, I would hear he or she saying, no, this sentence doesn't sound right. You got to move this, or you have to do this, put a punctuation here, put a punctuation there, what punctuation to use, you have to capitalize. So, and from that, once they would have gathered or they would have expanded the sentence to the best of their ability, they would go in front of the classroom and would share the question that he or she would have come up with. And based on that, the classroom or their peers, they would sit and they would criticize, may give positive criticism or negative criticism. It all depends on the sentence that that child would have constructed. They would say, well, okay, you needed to, there's a comma there. You could have put a comma here, or you could have used a conjunction to join the two sentences together. Leave criticism or feedback so that he or she would know what to do the next time or how to expand the sentences. Anybody else have any examples they would like to share, or challenges they would face, and using the silent way approach, how the child or children would react in the classroom?
So, after listening to all of that, right, let us conclude. We would have given some examples, right? So, I would like to throw this question out, right? How comfortable do you think your students would be learning with minimal teacher instruction? I want to throw this out to my audience, right? How comfortable do you think as a teacher your students would be with learning with minimal teacher instruction? And this question is for anybody's answer. How comfortable do you think the children would be?
So, okay. Well, many students might struggle at first because they're used to being told exactly what to do. Like they say, spoon feeding them, right? Do you know that saying, the food's spoon feeding them? So, but
Yes,
over
miss. Yes, miss.
time they would, yeah, but over time they would adapt, and you would start seeing them be more innovative, asking questions and working together to solve problems, right? Now, it's not about removing the teacher's voice. Don't get me wrong, it's not about removing the teacher's voice. It's about empowering the learner's voice. This is where um they would be become more confident, accurate, and be reflective learners, right? It takes practice. It takes a lot of practice and patience. But once it clicks to the students, the results are powerful. I can say that the results are powerful.
Thank you so much, miss. Like that's a very important consideration, right? So I'm seeing some questions coming in the chat here. To my colleagues, I want to say that who prefer the direct instruction, right? This approach doesn't eliminate completely the teacher guidance, It just simply shifts the learner to work independently, right? When it is used effectively, right? It helps the students structure and use language more naturally. I know, as Miss was saying with the spoon feeding, I know that as teachers, you would want to come and say, yes, I tried this approach, but yet still the children is saying anything. Yet still they're sitting there looking at me. I have a student in my classroom that does that. Like, he would just sit there and he would look at me. But we still have to keep trying. I'm seeing now that he's answering one and two questions. Like this afternoon, I will ask was so surprised when we were and I don't want to say science class. They don't want to bring this in because it is language that we're talking about. But he was actually responsive. He was answering a lot of questions. When I give, as Miss Paul was stating earlier, this week is oral sentence expansion. When I gave the sentence and I wrote the sentence on the board, he was able to say, Miss, we could add in this speech state. So it does actually work, right? It's just that we need a little more time and effort to put into it. We need a little more patience with the children. Sir, do you have any more thing to add before we wrap up? Because we do have to go and pay some bills.
Um, I would say that I would prefer more the silent voice approach, less instruction the teacher giving to children, because in my classroom I use more hands-on activity and they come up with their own definition, their own activities themselves, and they grasp the concept much easier to me. And that's all I want to share.
That's true. That's true. That's true. So, in conclusion, if my guests they have nothing more to say, I want to say the silent way supports language learning by fostering discovery, self correction, and critical thinking. All of these are skills essential for lifelong learning in the language arts classroom. We know, as we can see at common entrance, that there are areas that the children would fall down in, right? Maybe we can try using this approach in the classroom. I really hope that that is something you can take away. I want to know that you went back and you tried this approach and you come back and you say, yes, miss, it did work, right? Please don't forget my question that I threw out to you. Miss Prasad would have answered in her own way, but this question is still for you. How comfortable do you think your students would be with learning with minimal teacher instruction? How comfortable do you think they would be with minimal teacher instruction? If we have no more questions, any more input, I want to say thank you to my guests, Ms. Tashina Paul, Miss Karina C. Prasad, and Sir Josiah Payne. Thank you all for being here. Until next time, my viewers, please keep commenting, keep liking. Good night.